Roll Without a Self, Chapter 0. Jeannie loves novels. Forced to live a lie at the behest of my sister's captors, yet now while the heroes are praised for bringing peace, the same men strip me of the robes that once adorned me, passing my efforts off as the works of another, leaving me nothing but endless misery and scorn from the masses I once protected. Click, clack, tack. The sound of porcelain heels hitting the cold stone-like flooring echoed throughout the crevices of the edged prison walls, hitting a young man's ears who had been quietly resting his head, awaiting as the time ticked ever so closely for his public execution. Clack, tick, click. A noble figure in white and gold embroidered robe strolled lightly through the prison. One hand covered her face, though her eyes held cold detachment, while the other lifted her garments, as if the prison dust might contaminate her own presence. Saintess, please. Help me, Saintess. Saintess, I am innocent. Saintess, Saintess. 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 The other prisoners tried with all their might to call out to the noble lady in hopes of her having pity on them. One prisoner was even able to grab the corner of her outfit. The man in question was someone who was in prison for massacring his family in cold blood, yet he dared to cling to the Saintess in hopes of salvation. But the man's set of actions caused the very salvation he seeks to achieve never to see the light of day. The noble lady's eyes wrinkled into faint amusement before casually removing her outer robe and passing it to her attendants, who immediately transferred it to the man who touched it. While this handover was happening, the noble lady had quietly retreated out of the range of the man, her face shifting from amusement into a benevolent smile. She called to her shadow guards before whispering her orders in regard to the man who held her outer garments. The shadow guards briefed the prisoner on how they would be escorting him out of the prison. Hearing those words, the man felt almost moved to tears. Truly, he thought, the Saintess is a blessed being. The prisoner tried to express the immense gratitude he felt to the Saintess, but the guards stood in his way, so he only showed his longing and thanks through his eyes before promptly being taken away. The other prisoners stared at the man being taken away with a range of emotions: envy, greed, hatred, and shrewdness. Some of them even planned to recreate the scene that created the situation. The noble lady's facade nearly faltered at the audacity of those individuals, but instead of becoming colder, her benevolent smile grew wider as she clasped her hands together. As the Saintess, I am ashamed to admit that I can't help each individual person to be freed from the chains of lies and crimes that hold you down. She lightly curtsied towards the prisoners. The men who were about to curse her out for favoring some people over the others swallowed their words down, because despite the woman in front of them being a Saintess, she also held the title of a duke's daughter. Seeing that they stopped being so irritable, the Saintess continued lightly. But I can ensure that in the next few days that the nutrition you receive will be quite adequate. The prisoners' eyes lit up. They knew what that sentence really meant. They were getting meat on top of their regular portions. Thanks. Thank you, Saintess. Saintess, you're the best. Saintess, Saintess. 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 Click, clack, tack. The Saintess continued deep into the prison, to a place so isolated that regular people wouldn't be able to hear the loud chants of the prisoners. That being said, the person within the isolation is no regular person. Once the Saintess reached his cell, her assistants laid down a fluffy beige 8x6 area rug, then placed a pink oversized round chaise couch from their spatial pouch. After the preparations were completed, the noble lady removed her heels, bare feet vanishing into the fluffiness of the rug. Walking towards the couch, she sat down comfortably, grabbing a fluffed-up pillow and pressing it to her chest, her disdain-filled gaze looking over the young man who still kept his eyes closed despite the previous commotion. How does it feel, she said in a sweet, sickening voice, to have everything you accomplished these past few years be taken away from you? The young man merely frowned his eyebrows slightly, not bothering to reply to her taunt. All right, anger resonated through her words. I am sure your sister will be much more fun than this. The Saintess pushed her pillow aside, getting ready to leave when /clang talk. You dare! Despite the chains holding him back, the young man was still able to launch his body forward, creating loud screeching sounds. His eyes opened wide, looking dead set at the woman behind his cell, with immense hatred and killing intent covering his golden eyes. Your eyes are still as ugly as ever, I see. She plopped back into her chair, staring at him as though he was a prey who was just caught within her trap. Now, it's time for you to answer some of my questions. The killing intent in the man's eyes slowly dissipated, his body also slowly relaxed the more she talked. But the hatred he held for her still remained as clear as day. What? Quite a bit, prickly, aren't we? She raised her eyebrows slightly at the dismissive response of the young man. The boy pursed his lips at her words, causing the Saintess, who was watching him this entire time, to burst into laughter at the sign of his discomfort. How did you fool them? The Saintess stopped smiling, including the temple and my guards. How did you do it? Her eyes narrowed with killing intent as she went forth, asking the question which nearly everybody in the capital, including herself, were curious about. The young man didn't reply, so the noble lady hopped off her couch, landing on the soft rug. She lightly made her way towards the edge of the rug, which also happened to be in front of the cell's door. She tilted her head with one hand supporting her chin, a wicked grin appearing on her face. Can't be that your men's precious. She looked towards his leg area, was tragically compromised in the past. The young man didn't even flinch after hearing the question. Instead, he simply closed his eyes, lowering his head once again. Seeing that he didn't plan to answer the question, a faint trace of coldness emitted from herself. She was no longer in a good mood. Since you don't want to answer questions, let's play a game. She clapped twice and the assistants brought forth 2 full bags of letters. One bag has letters sent in the past 5 years, the other letters from the past week, which are filled with condemnation. She grabbed a letter from one of the bags, playing lightly with it. Let's see if we can find the same sender, from these 2 different times. Truly I tell you, it's fun to see how fickle people can be. She passed off the letter to Assistant A, who graciously accepted it before opening it up and starting to read it out loud. The letter that the Assistant A received happened to come from a 5-year-old girl who the young man had saved during his time playing as the Saintess. The letter, due to the child being so young, was mostly filled with little "I love you Saint" and a hand-drawn picture containing the image of the man and the little kid beside her wearing the same outfit the guy wore, as if to show the affection and admiration the kid had for her. Underneath the picture were the words "Role Model" and "Sent by Baby Maria." The young man did not budge, but his eyelashes flicked ever so slightly. Assistant B had long found a letter from the condemnation bag by Lady Maria which still held a faint perfume scent. The Saintess held out her hand receiving the letter. After briefing herself with the context of it, she smiled as she found a new interesting way to break the young man. "What's this? This game might be a little too easy for me." The Saintess chuckled lightly as she played with the letter in her hand. "Lady Maria. She would be 10 now, I presume?" One of her assistants affirmed her question. "Such a shame that poor young lady had her role model, the hero she cared about, be imprisoned by some wicked man. Truly I say, it's something to be sad about." Her eyes darted towards the man's clenched fists. "Especially if it said that the same man was the cause of her father's death within this last war." The man's body started shaking terribly. "Oh, boo-hoo-hoo, quite a generic tragic backstory," she taunted the girls past while her gaze still remained on the man who continued to keep his eyes closed. "What does her letter hold, I wonder?" "Stop," a weak hoarse voice called out, but the Saintess chose to ignore it. To the monster the noble lady's smile widened as she let out a deliberate gasp. "Oh my, this is quite the daring start, must be a heavy grudge. Please, stop." "You are the Saintess read with a light heart when a sharp sound took over her soothing voice. Saintess Serafina Aurelia Valcrest. Support Roll Without a Self. Roll Without a Self, Chapter 1. Jeannie loves novels. Bang. Nina slammed her hand on her reading table. Rage filled her body, blood rushing to her head. But before she could dwell on those emotions, the sharp sound snapped her out of her immersed state. Nina looked at her hands in shock. This was the first time she had felt this angry. She had always been quite sensible when it came to matters of this nature. Nina was born into a family of 7, where she was unlucky enough to be the middle child. Worse yet, her parents overly preferred boys over girls, viewing them as much more talented and well-mannered. So, most of the boys in her family got love and attention from both mom and dad. The only exception to this rule was her sister, who was gravely ill, and being the youngest of the 5 siblings, she was constantly doted on despite being a girl. That left Nina. She didn't fit any of the categories. She wasn't a boy, nor was she sick. But she still craved affection from her parents. So, she did what any child would do at that age. She tried every method she could manage to gain her parents' attention. But the only time she felt seen was when she took the blame for her siblings' mistakes. Whenever she took the fall for them, her parents and siblings would show her a small amount of kindness for a few days before coldly ignoring her once again. Even if the kindness was out of guilt, Nina was so starved of affection that, even though she felt wronged, she still held on. So, whenever her siblings got into trouble, she would apologize in their place and do everything she could to smooth things over. But eventually, people started catching on. "You can't keep apologizing for them. We need your siblings to come here themselves," they said. At their refusal to receive the apology, Nina dejectedly headed home to inform the family. When her parents heard that, they were disappointed in her. So were her siblings. And once again, they ignored her. Nina felt suffocated. She desperately tried other things to gain back the little affection she had accumulated over the years. Nina hated being ignored. She would rather die than lose what she built. In the darkest time of her life, her mother needed her to go to the doctor's office instead of her sister because she had gotten a cold. At the hospital, she was mistaken for her sister when picking up her meds, but even though she cleared up the misunderstanding, that situation gave her an idea. From that point on, she began pretending to be her siblings instead. She dressed like them, copied their voices, and learned their mannerisms. And it worked. From that day onward, whenever she needed to apologize, or do anything else on their behalf, she would prepare meticulous disguises so convincing that nobody realized she was impersonating them. Except for her dear friend, Emma. Emma had known Nina for years and understood the family dynamics better than anyone else. She was furious when she learned what Nina had been enduring, but Nina herself barely reacted to it anymore. She had long since become desensitized to the things she had to do to receive a crumb of affection. Eventually, Emma couldn't withstand her friend living like an object. So, she tried everything she could think of to help her understand that what she was experiencing was not normal. She gave her educational books, articles, and stories in hopes that something, anything, would finally be able to reach her. Like that, years passed until Emma found a novel titled The Fake Saintess's Revenge. She immediately recommended it to Nina, hoping it would help her develop a sense of self outside of serving her siblings and wearing their identities. Nina read it because she did not want to disappoint her friend. But the biggest reason was that Emma never gave up on her, and she saw Nina for who she was and enjoyed her presence without any hidden wants. At first, Nina did not care much about the story. She was just going through the motions. But the more she read about the fake Saintess and his journey alongside the heroes, the more invested she became. The protagonist had started this journey through a series of unfortunate events, but despite everything, he kept going in order to protect his sister. Nina really admired the tenacity of the fake Saintess. But there was something unsettling about the book, and it was that it never revealed his real name, only the name of his sister. As the story continued, the narration slowly stopped acknowledging even his true gender. Bit by bit, she watched him erase himself. In the story, no one called him by his real name. No one knew who he originally was. And the only one who could remind him was locked away and being held hostage. Eventually, he accepted that this false identity might remain his for the rest of his life. That realization made her chest ache, for reasons Nina could not fully explain. She remembered how Emma mentioned that the novel was supposed to be a reborn revenge story, but Nina could not understand why the author spent so much time detailing his life before the revenge plot ever began. Now that Nina had reached the part where the character was about to die, she was quite unwilling to continue. She hated it, the author, the plot. But there was one thing she hated the most, and that was how Saintess Serafina would not even allow him to die with dignity without opening old wounds. The Saintess stripped away what little remained of him and forced him to identify himself using the false identity he had worn for the past 5 years. Her actions, though understandable, hurt Nina to her core. She looked at her hand, which had hit the table once again, before rubbing her face tiredly. After that set of actions, she made her way to the shower. She really needed to cool off. Roll Without a Self, Chapter 2. Jeannie loves novels. After some time, Nina walked out of the shower, gently dabbing her hair dry with a towel. When ding, 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 a notification appeared on her phone placed on the reading table. Nina looked in that direction, water still clinging to the ends of her hair. She walked toward her phone, lowering the towel as she moved. As she was about to enter her passcode, another notification appeared. Ding. The name on the notification was Birth Father. Nina's eyes widened slightly, her thumb hovering over the phone as if the device itself had grown heavier. Why now? Nina felt uncertain. Why would he be messaging me right now? It had been a month since she last tried to contact them. A month since Emma convinced her to stop initiating everything herself. Emma had not forced her to do anything, not exactly. It had been careful pressure, repeated explanations, and patience over time that eventually made Nina give in. The idea had been simple: if Nina stopped reaching out first, then her parents would have to respond on their own. And if they responded, if they panicked, if they reached out, it would mean something. Emma had said it might even lead to apologies, to an acknowledgement, and maybe to something resembling a family. At the time, Nina had insisted she did not care about that. But deep inside, she knew that was not entirely true. There had always been a part of her that waited for it. A part that imagined hearing a simple apology and feeling everything settle into place, as if it could fix the emptiness she had carried for so long that she had stopped naming it. If she heard those words from her parents, if they said they wanted to be a true family, she would jump for joy, and even if she died right then and there, she would die happy. But days passed, and those days turned into weeks, until a month had gone by, and Nina had slowly but surely grown colder by the minute. So now that she received a message from her birth father, she did not know what to feel. Her hand hovered over the message, thoughts shifting slightly. She let out a sigh, closed her eyes, gathered her courage, and clicked on his profile, opening the messages he had sent. Messages. Birth father, hey, I need you to dress up as your brother and head to XXX location. Birth father, hey, why are you not replying? New messages. Birth father, listen, if you do this thing for us this time, we'll fully recognize you as our daughter. Isn't that what you always wanted? Birth father, did you change your number? I am coming to get you. Nina stared deeply at the latest message. She slowly started her reply. I will go, no need to come. Just as she was about to send the message, her gaze fell on the novel's book tile and one word stood out to her: revenge. With a deep breath, Nina blocked his number. They can come to her if they want, but she won't go to them. Feeling a little uneasy about her decision, Nina did the most reasonable thing she could think of at that moment. She called Emma. Ring. 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 Just as Nina started hesitating, thinking Emma might be busy, the call connected. Hello? Hello. Who is it? Emma's sleepy, hoarse voice came through the speaker. Emma, did I wake you up? I'm sorry. I can call later. It's nothing urgent. Wait, no. Emma immediately sounded more awake. Girl, you know I'm never too busy for you. What happened? Why are you calling at this time? Something wrong? Nina then went on to explain everything that had just happened. Oh, sweet baby, Emma sighed. You're just too precious, you know that. But good job. Seriously, good job. Then her tone shifted sharply. Wait. Do your parents still have the key to your house? Nina, answer the question. Sorry. That's fine. That's fine. Emma let out a breath. Baby steps. You're doing well. Just don't unblock them, okay? I'm gonna come over there and... Asa. Emma. Nina straightened in alarm. Emma, are you okay? In the middle of a loud crashing sound, Emma had apparently dropped her phone. Somehow, the fall accidentally activated video call mode, unwillingly revealing the chaotic scene before Nina. A half-naked man covered in scratches and kiss marks hurried across the room to catch Emma before she could fully fall off her chair. The camera shook violently. Nina could hear fragmented bits of conversation through the speaker. From what she could piece together, the man seemed genuinely upset that Emma was not taking proper care of herself. After a few seconds of awkward silence, Nina coughed lightly. Cough. Cough. The moment she did, Emma shoved the man away in embarrassment before scrambling to grab her phone. Go away for a second, Emma hissed toward him. Don't you need to do something today? Nina blinked. Does that mean he finally got his memories back? Emma paused. Oh. Right. Yeah. She scratched her cheek awkwardly. I guess I never really told you. He kind of got his memories back, a long time ago. And, yeah. We sort of made things official. Are you lying to me? Nina narrowed her eyes slightly. No. I'm stating facts. If you guys weren't official before, then how was he? Nina. Stop. Stop that right now. But seriously, what is he doing? Oh, right, Emma looked off to the side. He said there was a rat in his family that took some money from them. Like, a substantial amount of money. So he has to go deal with it. Nina frowned. How much money are we talking about? I honestly have no idea. He never told me. Emma groaned dramatically. You know what's hateful? I tried guessing the amount. I was like, was it $10,000? And he just looked at me and smiled because apparently I was being cute or something. Emma buried her face into her hands. Ugh. Are you okay? No, I'm not okay, but that's beside the point. Emma pointed toward the screen. We're getting off topic. Her expression softened. Are you all right, Nina? In what way? Emma hesitated. This was the first time they contacted you first. And from what you told me, she frowned slightly. Those messages weren't anywhere close to an apology. Nina looked off to the side, trying to find a way to change the topic. She started before her eyes landed on the book nearby. Hey, Emma, she said, you know the book you gave me? The Fake Saintess's Revenge? It's actually really interesting. I like it. It has a gripping storyline. Emma stared at her friend's face before sighing deeply to herself. You're so lucky you're adorable, you know that, she muttered under her breath before speaking louder. Tell me more about the story. What did you like about it? Nina immediately brightened, relieved that she had successfully managed to derail the conversation and before Emma could change her mind. Nina began talking at a rapid pace. She went on to express all the hatred, amazement, and anger she felt toward the author, especially regarding the ending and how sorry she felt for the young man as the story slowly approached the reincarnation plotline. Multiple times throughout the conversation, Nina complained that the author should have just started at the reincarnation arc instead of forcing readers to go through his entire journey beforehand because it only made her become attached to the character. The more Nina spoke, the wider Emma smiled. She secretly felt proud and occasionally, Emma hummed or added tiny comments about the story itself, clearly enjoying how enthusiastically Nina talked about the novel. At some point during the conversation, while Emma listened to her best friend ramble passionately, a shadow appeared behind her. The figure did not speak, but Emma could clearly feel the stare lingering over her shoulder. Eventually, Nina noticed him too. It was the same man from before. At some point, he had returned, now wearing a three-piece suit while holding a tie loosely in one hand. He stood behind Emma silently, looking at her with a solemn and oddly longing gaze. For a brief moment, Nina almost thought he resembled a puppy waiting for its owner to notice it. Nina immediately shook that thought out of her head. It's quite absurd to compare the poor puppies with that man. He was the same man who had survived multiple injuries under Emma's meticulous care and glared fiercely every single time Nina got too close to her best friend. In Nina's heart he cannot compare to them because there was no way someone like him could look anywhere as pitiable as a puppy. Eventually, Nina began running out of things to say, so the conversation slowly started winding down. As that happened, Emma finally realized Nina had become distracted by the figure standing behind her for quite some time now. She turned toward him with a questioning look. The man merely stared back before speaking in an almost endearing tone. Baby, can you help me with my tie? He lifted his tie slightly. I still can't move my hand properly for intricate work like this. The disbelief on Emma's face was immediate. How is that even possible? She shot back. You were using that hand perfectly fine last night. As Emma continued rambling about how he should not have acted so aggressively if he was injured, the man slowly turned his gaze toward Nina, who was still on the call. The killing intent in his eyes made Nina shiver through the screen. So she immediately spoke up. Anyways, bye, Emma. Emma instantly turned back with a sweet smile. Bye, sweetie. I might not be able to come over today because it seems like I can't get out of bed due to somebody's work, she said while glaring at the man briefly. But we'll definitely have a party later, okay? Then her tone softened further. And hopefully, your father probably won't come, but even if he does, call me immediately and I'll help you, all right sweetie? Nina nodded before ending the call. Her room returned to its eerily silence. But instead of lingering on the quiet as she always did before, Nina lowered her phone and stared at the ceiling in disbelief. Did Emma even realize what she had gotten herself involved with? That man looked like the type to be tangled up with some kind of mafia group or underground organization. Which was why Nina felt even more shocked remembering the almost pouty look he had earlier just to get Emma's attention. But then again, Nina had also derailed an entire conversation using the same method just to avoid answering a question she found difficult. So perhaps she understood his actions more than she wanted to admit. With that thought in mind, Nina grabbed the novel again and opened it back to where she had left off. The page was already half filled with notes and messy thoughts scribbled along the margins. After gathering the rest of her supplies, Nina returned to dissecting reading the book, Roll Without a Self, Chapter 3, continuation of CH0, book within a book. Jeannie loves novels. Saintess Serafina Aurelia Valcrest. His voice echoed throughout the halls. The other prisoners, far from the commotion, only heard a faint but sharp squeal coming from deep within the dungeon. If this had happened on any other day, the men would have scoffed at the tragedy of the prisoner who had dared to impersonate as their sane test despite being a disgusting man, finally facing his due punishment. But they were all just too excited by the thought of eating meat on top of their food. The time was ticking ever so closely to mealtime, they did not bother caring about a dead man. Deeper within the dungeon, however, the guards and attendants were completely blindsided by the fact that this man dared to yell at their sane tests. Some of them had even taken out their poison-covered weapons, ready to end him at any moment if he did anything rash in any way. But they completely forgot that the poor man could not do anything even if he wanted to. Nearly every part of his body was bound by chains, and even if he wanted to use his magical abilities, he couldn't due to the magic locking chain around his neck that suppressed his power. If he dared to use it, the more power he released, the heavier and tighter the chain would become around his neck. Serafina, on the other hand, was also quite surprised, but her eyes held more of a frantic, almost blissful gaze. She watched the maddening hatred and despair swirling within the young man's eyes. But, Serafina thought, this is not enough, maybe, just one more push. He still had a fighting spirit. Too much backbone not good. She signaled to her guards to prepare a few things from their spatial pouch, and the guards immediately went off to carry out her orders. They brought out 2 basin-sized iron cauldrons before filling them with charcoal and setting them ablaze. While they worked, they stirred the flames with strangely shaped iron rods. The chill within the prison slowly dissipated. The young man's gaze shifted toward the guards with caution as he tried to analyze what Lady Valcrest could possibly be planning at this point. Don't mind them, Saintess Serafina said. They're just insignificant ants. Unrelated to what we're doing. Wouldn't you agree, Jeanette Monet? The young man felt a cold sweat run down his back as he pursed his lips. Oh. Serafina smiled, how silly of me. She tilted her head poking her own cheek, that's your sister's name. Isn't that right, Nate Monet? What could you possibly want? Nate looked at Saintess Serafina as if he was discovering her true self for the first time. Why mock me this way? Saintess Serafina was about to answer, but then she felt an assessing gaze on her. Tisk, how did I miss father's spy? I was sure that I did a thorough sweep. Pity, guess I must do this the hard way. How did you deceive them, Nate? Her cold sharp gaze landed on the heaving young man, who still refused to answer. Pity, truly. I gave you a chance. Serafina directed 2 of the guards to move. The guards took the rods that had been submerged in the iron basin, pulling them out with a light swish. One of the assistants quickly opened the prison gate for them, and they stepped inside one at a time, making their way toward the young man. The strangely shaped sides of the glowing red irons faced him as the 2 guards positioned themselves so they could press the heated metal against his chest at the same time. The attendants expected Nate to scream, thrash, and react like any ordinary person would. But the man in question merely whimpered. He clenched his teeth, squeezed his eyes shut, and furrowed his brows into a deep frown, doing everything he could to deny that woman the satisfaction of seeing him break from the pain. After they were finished, the 2 guards withdrew the irons and returned them to the iron basin before storing everything away. They then made their way back to Saintess Serafina. One of them gave a slight nod, informing her that the task had been completed. Serafina gave them a skeptical glance before directing her assistants to fully open the gate. She was planning to head over to the prisoner herself. Once the assistants heard the order, they swiftly opened the gate. With a bit of effort, they were able to find the right type of rug that could reach the prisoner without getting too close to him. After some effort, though it was not the best placement, they managed to get something close enough. Unfortunately, it extended all the way to the back prison wall, meaning the rug itself ended up near the young man's feet. The assistants were about to panic, fearing they were about to lose their jobs because they had done the unthinkable while preparing the setup for Serafina. It's fine, Serafina said. This allows me to get a better look at the young man. Her gaze lingered on him briefly before she continued. Once this is finished, make sure you disintegrate it. I do not even want to see the ashes of this item in my presence ever again. Understood. The assistants quickly nodded their heads before stepping aside, allowing Serafina to make her way toward the prisoner. She slowly walked toward him, her feet hidden beneath the fluffy robe. Step by step, she approached Nate, who was held stiffly against the wall. The closer she got, the more clearly the burn on Nate's body came into view. Soon, she was only a couple of steps away. Her eyes drifted over the injury, which now appeared to spell out his first and last name across his chest. Looking at the blisters forming on his skin, Serafina tilted her head slightly and pressed her fingers against the left side of her face, lightly pricking her pinky in her mouth until blood surfaced, causing a metallic taste to spread on her tongue. But she never registered the pain, her gaze instead carried an almost fanatic, obsessed intensity. Why, finish it in such a perfect way, she murmured. She traced her hand over the damaged skin, drawing in the thick, burnt scent that lingered from the wound. Once this heals, it will be a perfect, steady reminder of what you are. She grabbed his chin, forcing him to look up at her as she leaned closer. And what your identity is. Her other hand moved behind his neck, brushing against the magical chain lock as she stroked it with manic fascination. After she finished caressing the back of his neck, a faint trace of blood from her earlier cut smeared lightly against the back of the chain. She leaned in close to his ear to whisper some words only he could hear. Roll Without a Self, Chapter 4. Jeannie Loves Novels. Conga. Bang. 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 An older maid made her way downstairs carrying 2 enormous pots filled with food. After reaching the ground, she lowered them carefully before heading back up to bring down the trays and utensils used to distribute meals to the prisoners. Cling. 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 Ding. A small signal echoed through the corridors to call the prisoners, but it was muffled over the loud cheers and excitement of the people it tried to inform that mealtime had arrived. Each prisoner received a bowl of rice, a thick serving of soup with meat, and utensils of their choosing. The food was still steaming hot, and its smell spread through the corridors, reaching even the deepest parts of the prison. _____. Saintess Serafina leaned in close to his ear to whisper some words only Nate could hear. She even covered her mouth as she did so, ensuring no one else could catch what she said. After her set of actions, she held her hand out and an attendant quickly placed down a handkerchief. While she cleaned her hands, she was making her way back to her temporary seat, when she noticed a pile of untouched and partially rotten food. A frown crossed her face as she noticed a faint dark mist swarming around within it. Luckily, it's quite weak. She clenched her robes tightly before quickening her steps. I need to alert. The aroma filled the cold stones of the prison. FAA, damn it. That thing had already started feasting on the aroma. So, Saintess Serafina did what she knew best. She raised the same handkerchief from earlier and lightly covered her nose. She did not want anything of that caliber near her. Her assistants immediately noticed her discomfort. They quickly brought out fans and air filters, redirecting airflow away from her. The guards also formed a controlled bubble around her, ensuring the smell did not reach her seat, essentially cutting off the oxygen supply of that creature. During the setup, Serafina turned toward Nate Monet. She wanted to test something. Are you excited for the meal today? She asked. Nate pursed his lips. Is that a yes or a no? She tilted her head. You have to be more clear with your thoughts, Nate Monet. I don't want any of your so-called meat, Nate said coldly, meeting her gaze directly. Why is that? She asked. You can't be serious. Nate replied, his eyes unwillingly drifting towards the frantic mist. You and I both know what meat truly is. Oh. She studied him for a moment. Could that be the reason you refused to eat the meals presented to you these past few days? The young man remained silent, lips pressed together. Oh my goodness, you're such a dear, she said lightly. But at the beginning, you were eating quite happily. Unless. Her eyes sharpened slightly, as she pursed her lips. You see it, don't you? She asked. Would that change anything? He answered. That's true, she said after a pause. It's quite sad, but it could have been put to good use. She let out a small sigh. If I knew this earlier, you would have set me up in a crowded prison, wouldn't you? Nate finished her sentence. Oh my, she laughed lightly, though her eyes told a different story. You're such a jokester. Sign. Why was it you? She murmured to herself. We can't change the past, Nate said flatly. Therefore, it is no longer a question of why. Clap. 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 Such a beautiful, yet romantic scene. What a shame, though. The little game you were trying to play has long been seen through by me. Father. Saintess Serafina Aurelia Valcrest stood up in shock, in contrast to the figure of the Duke who slowly walked in carrying a heavy presence despite his silent footsteps. What brings you here? She asked, her voice trembling slightly at the end. Well, if I did not appear, dear, you would have allowed an insignificant variable to slip through, wouldn't you? What are you talking about? She asked. The Duke snapped his fingers. One of the shadow guards stepped forward, carrying a frightened girl who bore a striking resemblance to the individual in chains. Her mouth was covered with a cloth, preventing her from speaking. As she looked around in panic, fear filling her eyes as she tried to understand where she was, the Duke spoke. This is a rat I found trying to escape. It seems she had a very elaborate yet interesting path planned. He turned his gaze toward Serafina. Care to explain? Serafina pursed her lips, refusing to engage. If you won't talk, then, the Duke said, looking toward the shadow guard. The shadow guard immediately understood and removed the cloth stuffed into the girl's mouth. She will. After the cloth was removed from Jeanette Monet's mouth, she glared at the Duke with hatred. Gathering saliva in her mouth, she spat at him. Die, you old bastard, she said, almost gritting her teeth. Duke Valcrest looked at the spit that landed on the lower corner of his coat with absolute disgust. Kill her. The guard pulled out a weapon, ready to shoot. But Nate Monet, who had been lying still throughout this entire process, suddenly opened his eyes. In a flash, he moved toward the guard, using his magic to stop him from killing his sister. However, the Duke had long anticipated his actions. A barrier was already surrounding him, making Nate's magic completely useless. You finally decided to stop pretending to be weak, I see, the Duke said. Quite a pity, though. Everything before this was merely speculation. Had you not acted, you and your sister might have gotten off completely free. He laughed heartily. You're still far too young. The Duke turned his attention towards Saintess Serafina. You created the perfect scenario, the perfect play, and yet, with just a little provocation, everything falls apart. He pointed at Jeanette Monet and Nate Monet. You see these creatures? They are worthless. As a Valcrest, you should know that working with variables is never the best strategy. They could always turn on you. Like how he did. He turned on your plan just to protect his so-called sister. The Duke snapped his fingers. The person who had been disguised as Jeanette Monet collapsed, and another guard stepped forward to catch them. This whole charade was nothing but a ruse. Your sister was never here. He laughed loudly, the sound only fueling Nate Monet's anger. The Duke had made one mistake. He could insult him. He could threaten him. He could even use his position against him. But he could not mock his relationship with his sister and expect Nate to remain calm. Nate Monet's fury burned through him. He did not care that the Duke had a barrier around him. He did not care about the consequences waiting afterward. He wanted the man dead. The consequences could come later. He would deal with them when they arrived. Nate lunged forward in rage. But he failed to notice that, at some point, the figures in front of him had changed. The person standing there was no longer the Duke. It was a young man, completely terrified, staring at him. But Nate only saw the Duke laughing at him. He had fallen into a hallucination which was slowly shattering. Before he could react to the change, he had already attacked him. The scene that followed was brutal, leaving the young man suffering a gruesome and painful death. Roll Without a Self, Chapter 5. Jeannie loves novels. Clap. 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 The sound of clapping woke Nate Monet from his frantic massacre, breaking through his frantic state almost as if shattering the illusion in front of him. He turned his gaze toward the direction the sound was coming from and found that the person he thought he had killed was standing several feet away, not a hair out of place. Did you enjoy the play? He said, a grin plastered on his chiseled face. Nate Monet shook with horror. If the person he attacked was not the Duke, then who? He looked down at the corpse in front of him. His eyes slowly traveled from the twisted legs, to the body, to the wounds he had inflicted. He had pulled the tendons from the muscles, split the stomach open, and ripped out the heart tendons and small intestine, trying to ensure the maximum pain the person could feel before allowing him the relief of death. As his gaze made its way up to the man's face, he noticed that the man had died with his eyes open, looking terrified, his mouth open as though to scream for help. But due to the fact that he had ripped out his tongue when he had gotten sick of the man mocking him, he could not even let out his last words. The man stumbled back. Now that the hallucination was gone, his senses came back online, and the truth of what happened kept replaying in his mind. The young man had been repeatedly screaming for help, asking him to stop, and crying out, wondering what he could have possibly done to deserve this end. But Nate, consumed by his rage and the illusion created from the Duke's provocation, had only seen the Duke standing before him. When the young man begged him to stop, Nate had ignored him, convinced he was hearing the Duke's voice instead. He had ripped out the man's tongue, saying that he was too noisy. Nate rubbed his mouth before stopping to retch. He hadn't eaten anything in the past 3 days, so all he could do was heave repeatedly. The Duke stepped forward, step by step, before stepping on the man's hand and grinding his heel into it, causing the man to cry out in pain. And as Nate was about to lash out, he felt weak, as though something was taking back his power. Even though he tried to hide his confusion, it was already too late. The Duke had noticed it. Ha, 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 ha. The Duke burst out into manic laughter. So it was true. Who would have thought that the goddess, fickle as she always is when it comes to the innocent, would not care whether her messenger was deceived or not, and would still punish her own holder and vessel. Ha, 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 ha. He turned away from the man who was crouching on the floor, screaming in pain, almost scratching at his skin, somehow trying to claw into himself to stop the sensation of something being emptied. My dear daughter, do you see how fickle the goddess you serve is? Quite a fickle woman she is, wouldn't you agree? Serafina, for now, was being held down by her maids and attendants, looking defiantly at her own father. Her purple eyes burned brightly as she stared intensely at him. I wonder, when given a choice between a vessel who killed an innocent man and my daughter, who would she pick? As Nate continued losing his power, the pain eventually lessened, and he stopped screaming and shaking. His eyes remained open due to the sheer pain he felt, but slowly, the golden irises quietly faded, revealing the faint dull bluish-gray color underneath. The more the gold layer faded, the more visible it became. And as it faded away completely, Saintess Serafina, who was still being held down on her couch, felt warmth start to envelop her body, a power and sensation she hadn't felt in a long time. Slowly, her purple eyes changed, shifting from deep purple all the way to a radiant gold. After her eyes completely changed, her powers returned, this time much stronger than before. And because of that, she could see the darkness that enveloped her own father. The more she looked, the more the darkness twisted and turned, resembling the many souls that had died at her father's fingertips and through his influence. He wasn't the only one she saw. Her own guards, even her attendants, everything came at her way too fast. And after enjoying 5 years, well, actually, 6 years of peace, she couldn't handle it as she used to. She covered her mouth, pushing the attendants aside. The memories were pouring into her, sweeping away all the control that she had. The pain and the revenge that those souls screamed for came at her in waves that she never imagined were possible. It was all too much for her that she passed out completely. The Duke watched his daughter with cold indifference. What a pity, he said lightly. Sadly, she's going to miss a good show, wouldn't you say, Nate Monet? He went over, kicking the young man. He seemed nearly lifeless. The young man seemed to want to strike forward, but his movements were awkward. The Duke looked at him for a while before bursting into laughter again. The goddess is quite cruel, isn't she? Taking away your eyesight. How pitiable. He waved his hand before an attendant brought forth an antidote. Heal the wretch, the Duke said. The attendant followed his order, grabbing the man's face, forcefully opening his mouth, and pouring the antidote down. After ensuring the last drop went down his mouth, he covered him completely, and no matter how the man frothed, moved, and struggled, his mouth remained covered until he had drained every single last drop. After ensuring that it was finished, the attendant jumped back into the darkness. After he left, Nate started coughing, but before he could even let out a second cough, his eyes began to sting. And as he was about to try to claw his eyes out, the Duke activated his magic. Since Nate was now nothing but a regular man, he could not even fight back. His hands were frozen. His whole body was frozen in a stiff, frozen-like state as his feet and neck remained restrained, and pain radiated through his eyes. No matter how hard he tried to scream, his body refused to do so. Eventually, after some time, though his eyes were quite swollen, he was able to slowly start regaining his sight. After doing so, the Duke made him move according to his will, making him stand on his own 2 feet. As he did so, the Duke called forth Seraph and his attendants to bring tables and chairs, and called the Mealers to bring forth the food. And so they did. He controlled the young man to go and eat. The young man screamed, but he couldn't. He felt trapped in his own body, and he couldn't stop himself from walking over, taking a seat, and eating everything until the very last bite. So, how did you enjoy your sister? The Duke said lightly, asking a seemingly simple question. But to Nate Monet, that question shattered his will. Oh, I forgot, the Duke said lightly, wiping his hand. You need to speak in order to answer my question. Once freed, instead of bothering with the old man, Nate took this time to bite off his tongue and die. Why do they always do this? The Duke said in a light-hearted voice. Part 1, the end. Part 2, the reborn plot begins. Roll Without a Self, Chapter 6. Jeannie loves novels. As the fake Saintess's revenge was approaching its first major turning point of the book, the death of the main character before the rebirth and revenge plot truly began, everything seemed to be moving far too fast for Nina. Even though she logically understood that Nate had to die for the revenge to actually begin, she still hated the idea of it happening. It was a rebirth revenge story. Emma had told her that from the beginning. Nina knew that, logically, the protagonist would have to die at some point for the story to work, and she understood that the entire purpose of this genre was built around loss, death, and the desire to take back what was stolen. She understood it. But that did not stop her from wishing that somehow, Nate would make it through. That he would survive. That he would leave everything behind and live peacefully in the countryside with his sister, away from all the suffering that had followed him for his entire life. She had even been looking forward to the reunion 5 years later, where all the heroes would meet again and see how everyone had changed, where they would laugh about their past struggles and be grateful that they had all survived. They had promised each other before going off to fight the great threat that they would all stay alive until they met again. Nina had been excited for that day. So even though she knew this was a rebirth revenge story, and even though she knew Nate had to die for the plot to actually begin, she still did not want it to happen. And because of the way Saintess Serafina Valcrest operated, Nina genuinely thought there was a chance. Serafina had everything planned down to the smallest detail. Even though Nina knew everything was part of a larger play created by the Saintess herself, she still found herself getting angry at her. I mean, seriously. What was she supposed to think? At the same time, Nina understood that the level of cruelty Serafina used could have been much worse, and if the Saintess truly intended to get Nate and his sister out safely like she had promised from the beginning, then perhaps this was the only method that would actually work. But what Nina could not understand was how the Duke found out. Actually, forget the Duke. Right now, she was angry at Nate. She had only just learned his name, and she was already furious with him. Absolutely furious. Serafina had somehow managed to deactivate his magic suppressor without alerting anyone. And then the Duke appeared. Even if the Duke had his sister, Nate should have known that the magical restraints around him were still active. If he tried to use too much magic while they were still connected, his own body would reject it. His head would practically fly off. He would have basically decapitated himself. And he still tried to fight. Why? He was so stupid. It was so annoying. She thought this guy was supposed to be smart. Then again, this was the same person who disguised himself as a girl and infiltrated a temple just to protect his sister. Fine. She could understand that. That was actually clever. But this was different. Why would he do that? It was one thing to think about fighting back, but couldn't he at least pretend to be calm? That was the entire point. Freedom was right there. Right there. And he just had to announce to everyone that the Saintess had unlocked his magic suppressor. You idiot. Ahahaha. Whenever Nina became too overwhelmed by what was happening in a story, she would sometimes get up from her seat and walk around her room, taking deep breaths before sitting back down and continuing. But this time was different. This one was genuinely difficult for her to handle. She found herself struggling to breathe. The emotions were becoming too much, and before she even realized it, her hand had already reached toward the paper bag she always kept nearby. The paper bag itself was nothing special. It was simply something that had once held the gifts Emma gave her as a housewarming present when Nina moved into her new apartment about a year ago. Afterward, she kept it. Emma had insisted on celebrating the move because, according to her, it was a huge step forward. Even though Nina lived in an apartment complex, Emma did not care. "It's the place you come back to every day," she had said. "The place you sleep and rest. That makes it a home, and if it's a home, then it deserves a housewarming party." After their fun night of eating, drinking pop, and having barbecue together, Emma had given Nina several toiletries, sanitary supplies, and household necessities before helping her bring everything back to the apartment. Afterward, the two of them had gone upstairs together. Emma had said she needed to use the washroom, so she asked Nina if she could use it. She lightly joked that even though it was Nina's place, since she was practically using the washroom for the first time, that technically meant it was a house of two. However, when Emma noticed Nina's uncomfortable expression, she immediately clarified that she was joking and that Nina should not take it seriously. But Nina knew. She absolutely knew. Emma had never hidden the fact that she always wanted them to live together, because she wanted to check on Nina and make sure she was okay. But she also respected Nina's desire for her own space and independence, so she never forced the idea. The only thing Emma never backed down from, the one thing she always tried to compromise on, was that Nina needed to leave her parents' house and build a life outside of it. Even if Emma was not going to share that space with her, she wanted Nina to have somewhere she could truly feel free. When Emma left to use the washroom, Nina, who had always been surrounded by noise and constant movement, suddenly felt a strange emptiness. The room became eerily quiet. And that quietness reminded her of something Emma had once said. "If it's the place you always return to, the place you sleep, then it's home." As Nina followed that thought, she remembered telling her parents about moving out and how annoyed they had been that she never told them sooner. But the real reason they were upset was because they would no longer have someone available to help with her sick sister. That realization had hurt more than she wanted to admit. At the time, she never had the chance to process it because her sister always needed her. She had always been too busy making sure someone else was okay. But now the silence was too loud. The quiet was too loud. And her mind started to panic. Quietness was dangerous. Quietness meant something was wrong. Either her sister was sick, or something terrible was about to happen. She hated the quiet. Nina did not remember much of what happened after that. Most of the day existed only as scattered fragments in her memory, disconnected pieces that refused to properly fit together no matter how hard she tried to arrange them. The one thing she did remember clearly was Emma's voice. "Breathe." That was what she remembered most. Not the panic. Not the fear. Not the overwhelming feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Just Emma's voice. "Breathe." The next day, Emma had explained what happened. According to her, when she came out of the washroom, she found Nina huddled up in a corner, hyperventilating so badly that she could barely get a proper breath into her lungs. Emma admitted that she had suspected something like this might happen eventually. Not necessarily that day. Not necessarily at that moment. But eventually. Nina had spent so much of her life constantly moving from one problem to another, constantly helping someone, constantly worrying about someone, that Emma had always wondered what would happen when all of that suddenly stopped and Nina was left alone with her own thoughts. Apparently, the answer was not a pleasant one. Emma had quickly helped her. Throughout the entire ordeal, she had stayed beside her, continuously talking to her, continuously reminding her to breathe, continuously trying to pull her attention away from whatever spiral her thoughts had fallen into. Later, after things had finally calmed down enough for Nina to stop hyperventilating, Emma helped her onto the bed. Even then, she refused to leave. She simply sat there. Watching. Waiting. Making sure Nina was actually okay. Eventually, Emma took her to see a doctor so that she could receive medication to help manage the anxiety and panic attacks. Afterward, once they returned home, Emma carefully explained everything the doctor had told her, repeating some parts multiple times just to make sure Nina actually remembered it. Then she handed over the medication and the paper bag. "Anytime you're not sure what to do," Emma had said, holding the bag out toward her, "I want you to breathe into this as hard as you can, then breathe normally, then do it again." Nina stared at the bag. Emma continued. "And if that doesn't help, call me." Nina opened her mouth. Emma immediately pointed a finger at her. "Not a text." Nina closed her mouth. "A call." Nina sighed. Emma narrowed her eyes. "A real phone call. I heard you the first time." "I don't think you did." Nina rolled her eyes. Emma ignored her. "I'll stay on the phone with you every time if I have to." Nina wanted to refuse. She really wanted to refuse. She hated being a burden. She hated needing help. She hated the idea of making someone worry about her. But when she looked at Emma's face and saw the exhaustion there, the tired eyes and the concern that Emma was trying very hard not to show too openly, she could not bring herself to say no. This girl was doing all of this because she cared. So Nina simply took the bag and nodded. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Emma continued staring at her. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Closed it again. Then opened it a third time before stopping herself once more. Nina watched the entire process with growing confusion. After several more attempts, she finally sighed. "What is it?" Emma immediately looked away. That only made Nina more suspicious. "What is it?" she repeated. Emma bit her lip. For a few seconds, she looked like she was debating whether or not she should even ask. Then, finally, she spoke. "Can I ask why?" Nina frowned. Why what? Why this happened? Silence settled between them. Nina looked away. She already knew the answer. She just did not particularly like it. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then Nina finally opened her mouth. The silence. Emma waited. Nina swallowed. It was too loud. The moment those words left her mouth, Emma started crying. Actually crying. Nina froze. This was a problem, a very large problem. She had seen Emma cry before. Emma cried surprisingly often, and because of that she had a remarkable ability to cry over almost anything in a way that did not ruin her makeup or ruin her feng shui. But this was different. Emma had completely broken down. The tears simply kept coming, composure be damned. Nina sat there, horrified. Emma was crying and she had absolutely no idea what she was supposed to do about it. Was she supposed to hug her? Pat her shoulder? Offer tissues? Or maybe just run away? What was a socially acceptable response to the situation? Nina asked herself, but she had no idea. Eventually, all she could do was awkwardly sit there and wait for Emma to recover on her own. Unfortunately, Emma cried herself so hard that she ended up being sick, which somehow made the situation even worse. In the end, the rest of the day was spent at Nina's house with one person recovering from a panic attack and the other recovering from crying herself sick. Neither of them could even make fun of the other because both of them were equally pathetic. The next day, Nina called the school and informed them that she would not be coming in. Emma ended up calling out of work as well, but instead of staying at Nina's home, she ran off saying that she needed to do something. After Emma left, Nina was alone again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't that the quiet, the silence, was too loud. No. She could faintly hear people in other rooms of the building, some talking, some arguing, some playing below, but all of it was muffled behind the walls, and as more time passed, more people left for work or school, causing the building to grow quieter and quieter. Nina had been sitting there, staring at the wall for quite some time, but when she finally came to, she found that there wasn't even the faintest sound coming from any of her neighbors. Maybe I should go back, she thought. Maybe, just maybe, Emma was wrong. I don't feel right about this. Could it be that I abandoned my family? Are they angry with me? She chuckled to herself. Of course they're angry. They told me that the day I left. They also told me not to come back. She placed a hand over her chest. Everything seems normal. I'm not having trouble breathing. This is all so strange. What if it happens again? This time I was able to get through it because Emma was there, but I'm not sure if I can do it next time. Does this mean I'm sick? Wait, if I'm considered sick, would that mean my family? Bang. Emma threw the door open. Emma walked in carrying 2 large boxes while her brother followed behind her with an armful of items. Nina blinked. Emma immediately began unpacking the contents of the boxes. What Nina saw was a collection of speakers, children's toys, and all sorts of things designed to make noise. There was even a children's step piano. Every time someone stepped on one of the keys, it played a sound. Emma, what are you doing? Nina asked. I'm helping you defeat the silence, Emma declared. The silence can never beat noise. Specifically curated noise. Not random noise. Carefully selected noise. Guaranteed by yours truly. She pointed proudly at the boxes. I spent a lot of time putting this together. Meanwhile, her brother was busy setting up some of the more complicated equipment. So what is actually going on? Nina asked. Well, her brother said, Emma told us about the situation. He scratched the back of his head. So for the past couple of days, we've been recording ordinary things happening around the house. Just normal everyday sounds. It's only been 2 days so far, but don't worry. We'll record more and send them to you. That way we can create a sense of randomness. Different sounds, different activities, different recordings. We can even get recordings from other places if necessary. Even if it's artificial, hopefully it'll help recreate the feeling of people being around. You guys don't need to do that, Nina said. Oh, we do, he replied. I hope you'll accept it as our way of thanking you for everything you've done for Emma. Without you, I'm not sure we'd still have her. And this is one way we can repay you. Before Nina could respond, Emma suddenly called out. Nina. Come here. You need to see this. Nina walked over. What are those? She asked. Emma held up a small novelty toy. You know those things that make noise when you smack them together? She grinned. Isn't this cute? I've set it to make a sound every hour. I could set it to completely random intervals, but I figured we'd start simple. You can turn it off at night if you want. Actually, no. If it's too quiet at night, leave it on. Never let the silence win. Nina stared at her. Emma looked entirely serious. A little while later, a sudden loud noise echoed through the apartment. Nina turned toward the source. The culprit was a simple banging monkey. She stared at it deeply. When she first got it, Nina found it quite annoying. But she eventually got used to it before putting it in a setting she didn't mind, and oddly enough, it helped. Every now and then, the random noises interrupted her spiraling thoughts and forced her attention elsewhere. Most of the time, her overthinking led her somewhere unpleasant. This time, however, she found herself thinking about something different. At least the monkey would never do something as stupid as Nate Monet. Roll Without a Self, Chapter 7. Jeannie loves novels. After the little personal jab towards Nate Monet, Nina returned back to reading The Fake Saintess's Revenge. But not before popping a sugar sweet, which Emma had brought for her in fanfare a while back. Even with the sweetness pulling at her teeth, Nina couldn't help but clench her fists when she watched Nate Monet kill off a random character. It wasn't even the fact that he had killed someone that shocked her. It was the fact that the person was supposedly innocent, and Nina hated seeing him fall into such a frantic, crazed state. Still, after crunching down on multiple other candies in order to satiate her anger, Nina was finally able to reach what seemed to be the end of part 1. She flipped the page and saw the new chapter title page. Rebirth. The rebirth plotline was finally about to begin. This was the plot she had been actively waiting for quite some time now. So she could only hold her breath as she continued reading. There were only a couple more lines before the ending when she realized that the Duke had taken control of Nate, making him eat something. Nina felt her stomach churn. She didn't feel good about this. Then, when she read the next line of what the Duke said, Nina clutched her mouth and ran straight to the bathroom to puke out everything, which was mostly candy and some porridge she had eaten earlier that day. She wiped her lips before flushing the toilet, and as she reached her bathroom mirror, she looked at her own gaunt expression. She hated the current Nate. It was one thing for the guy to kill someone innocent, which had already shocked her, but the thing that made her so angry was that it didn't make it right for the Duke to make him eat his own. She felt her stomach turn again. No, no, no. She frantically tried to remove that image from her mind. I am not about to think about that. After taking some minutes to calm herself, she went back to the book in question, dragging her feet every step of the way. The image repeated. This is fictional. This is not real. It will be fine. Once I finish this, I'll tell her never to give me any more. I will finish this. Just this. Just this. I can do it. With the words from the earlier part of the book being so demanding of her focus and so shocking, Nina could only take this one step at a time. She sat back in her seat, fully drained, mustering every bit of courage to read everything. At this point, when she realized that Nate bit his own tongue to kill himself, she was not fazed. Nina felt like a monk who had achieved enlightenment. But that state was shattered when she read the words. Why do they always do this? If there was something else after this, and if that was not the last line of this thing, Nina could have brushed it off. But that was the last line. The next thing after that was the end of part 1. This left Nina staring absent-mindedly at the page, almost meditating on that line. While Nina was in her own little world, downstairs, her door was being jostled open. After some time, the door finally opened to two older individuals, one male and one female, Nina's parents. After opening the door, they unlocked the room. Mr. Blackmore walked straight through in heavy, rapid strides, while Mrs. Blackmore looked around the doorway to see if there were any spare household slippers for her to change into. Seeing there were none, she unwillingly walked in as well. Bit by bit, they searched through the first floor in search of someone. When they heard footsteps coming from upstairs, they both turned to one another and walked up the stairs. As they reached the top of the stairs, they noticed one door was slightly ajar. Seeing that, they decided to start their search there. When they entered, they found Nina sitting in the middle of the room at her reading table, her face deep in thought. Despite her parents standing right in front of her, she did not stand to greet them, almost as if she did not see them. While Mrs. Blackmore was trying to figure out what this behavior could possibly mean, Mr. Blackmore walked up to Nina, snatching the book right out of her hands. Nina, who had been in deep thought, wondering if she should get angry at the author for doing such a thing, reflexively reached out without looking at anyone. Give it back. She automatically yelled. Mr. Blackmore stumbled, and in that moment, he ended up letting go of the book as it fell down. Nina, who also belatedly realized the person in front of her was not Emma coming to surprise her, looked up and froze when she saw her own father. The book fell to the ground without anybody being able to catch it. After a loud bang from the book hitting the ground, neither of them moved. Each had their own thoughts, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It was only Mrs. Blackmore who lightly walked towards Nina, picking up the book that had fallen on the ground and trying to dust it off. As she was doing so, she read the title of the book. Her hand stiffened slightly. In that moment, Nina, who had been staring blankly at her father, quickly snatched the book back, stepping a couple of steps away and looking at her parents in confusion. What are you doing here? She asked. Before Mr. Blackmore could open his mouth and say anything, Mrs. Blackmore stepped forward, looking worriedly at Nina's face. Are you sick? She said, her hands almost trembling. Why didn't you tell us? If I knew. No, Nina said, her hands trembling as she hid it by grasping her book harder. It's nothing serious. I just ate something off today. Hearing that, Mrs. Blackmore let out a sigh of relief. Why are you not ready to go? I told you to go to XX location, Mr. Blackmore said. Nina lowered her eyes. You never told me the time. Then you should have asked instead of leaving the messages unread. I was in the shower. By the time I got out, you had already said that you would come to see me. So I just replied to that. Mr. Blackmore frowned. Your manner of speaking is highly disrespectful when speaking to a parent. Seeing that things were getting heated, Mrs. Blackmore stepped between them. Nina. She gave what seemed to be a generous lecture, but to Nina, it only felt like her mother was trying to endure it. Nina looked at her mother and then looked away from her eyes before setting her book aside and stepping closer. After the lecture, Mrs. Blackmore brought forth a package from her bag, passing it over to Nina with a light smile. Nina opened it, and what she saw inside was a suit. Meaningless. Mrs. Blackmore looked at her in confusion. We thought the reason you might not want to do this was because you couldn't get an outfit for your brother, so we came to give you that. And something nice, you know. Nina stared at the suit in her hands. Her fingers tightened slightly around the fabric. For some reason, she did not feel happy nor touched. She only felt tired. Roll Without a Self, Chapter 8. Jeannie loves novels. The bathroom door clicked shut behind Nina. Before she realized what she was doing, she had already locked it and dragged the small storage drawer against the entrance. It was not nearly heavy enough to stop anyone determined to come inside, but the extra barrier somehow made her feel safer, as though placing even one more obstacle between herself and the people outside would give her enough time to gather the composure she had almost lost. A moment earlier, Mrs. Blackmore had heard the single word Nina accidentally whispered beneath her breath. Meaningless. The word had escaped before she could stop it. The instant her mother asked what she meant, Nina's body reacted long before her thoughts could catch up. She hastily muttered that it was nothing, grabbed the gift they had brought for her, and disappeared into the bathroom before anyone could ask another question. Now that she was finally alone, the silence inside the room wrapped itself around her. She stood with her back resting against the door, her breathing uneven as the sounds from outside gradually became muffled by the walls. She could still faintly make out her parents talking to one another, but their voices no longer sounded close. Instead, they seemed strangely distant, almost as though they belonged to someone else's family rather than her own. Nina closed her eyes. Slowly, she inhaled through her nose before letting the air escape just as gradually through her mouth, repeating the same breathing exercise Emma had patiently drilled into her after countless panic attacks. The panic did not disappear immediately, nor did the tightness in her chest vanish altogether, but with each controlled breath, it loosened enough that she no longer felt as though her thoughts were spiraling beyond her control. Only after nearly a minute had passed did she finally push herself away from the door and make her way toward the sink. The mirror reflected a young woman whose face had become noticeably flushed. A few loose strands had escaped from the protective hairstyle she had spent the last month carefully maintaining, and the exhaustion beneath her eyes made her appear far older than she actually was. Without giving herself time to think, she turned the faucet on and splashed handful after handful of cold water across her face until the lingering heat finally subsided. She remained there for several more moments before drying herself with a towel, her gaze inevitably drifting toward the gift resting quietly on the counter. It was a suit. A perfectly tailored suit for her younger brother. Her parents had brought it without the slightest hesitation because they had never once considered the possibility that she would refuse. To them, this was simply another request she would naturally accept, just as she always had. Another identity for her to wear. Another role for her to perform. Nina lowered her eyes and quietly turned away. She did not want to think about the suit. Instead, she walked toward the very back corner of the bathroom where several forgotten bottles and cleaning supplies had been stacked over the month. Hidden behind them, tucked beneath one of the lower shelves where cobwebs stretched lazily across the corners, rested an old storage box that had not been touched in quite some time. She crouched down and carefully dragged it into the open. Despite the dust coating its surface, the box itself remained in remarkably good condition. The moment she lifted the lid, however, a cloud of fine dust drifted upward, causing her to cough softly as she waved it away with one hand. Inside lay the remnants of another life. Everything had been arranged with almost obsessive precision. Customized makeup palettes rested beside specialized brushes, hairstyling equipment, prosthetic supplies, accessories, contact lenses, fragrances, and countless other items collected over the years. Every tool had once served the same purpose. Helping Nina disappear. Several smaller containers sat neatly organized inside the larger box, each one labeled with the name of a different sibling. For a long while, Nina simply stared at them. Eventually, her fingers moved toward the container bearing her younger brother's name. She lifted it onto the counter and, after pausing briefly to remember the combination, entered the password. A quiet click echoed through the bathroom as the lock disengaged. The contents were exactly as she remembered. The inside had been customized specifically for him. Different foundation shades, contour references, color correctors, styling products, and a recently updated photograph showing every detail of her younger brother's appearance had all been carefully arranged in their proper places. The photograph was far more than a simple reference. It was an instruction manual. A reminder. A blueprint explaining exactly how Nina Blackmore was supposed to disappear. She stared at it for several long seconds before quietly letting out a sigh. This is ridiculous. Yet even as she muttered those words, her hands had already begun moving. She no longer needed written instructions. Years of practice had engraved every detail into her memory. She knew the way he smiled, the way he stood, the slight tilt of his head whenever he became impatient, the cadence of his voice, the rhythm of his footsteps, and even the tiny imperfections that made him recognizable to those closest to him. Not because she had wanted to learn them. Because she had needed to. She placed the reference photograph against the mirror before beginning the familiar routine, her hands working almost entirely on instinct as layer after layer slowly transformed the face staring back at her into someone else. After finishing styling the hairpiece, Nina lowered her gaze toward the sink. Loose strands of hair littered the countertop and floor, scattered reminders of the person she had quietly set aside. A faint frown crossed her face as she crouched down to gather every strand, carefully wiping the counter and sweeping away the evidence until the bathroom looked exactly as it had before. Only after she was satisfied that nothing remained did she make her way back to the shower. She reached toward the bottle of shampoo she normally used. Her hand stopped halfway. Nina stared at it for a long moment before quietly withdrawing it. Today she was not leaving this bathroom as herself. She was leaving as her younger brother. Turning back toward the open box, she searched through its neatly organized contents until she found the body wash and shampoo that belonged to Elias. She had bought the exact same brands years ago after memorizing the scent that always lingered on him. It had become second nature by now. Without another word, she washed herself using products that did not belong to her, allowing the familiar fragrance to replace her own until even that final detail matched the image she intended to present. Once she finished, she stepped back in front of the mirror and completed the last portions of her makeup with practiced precision. Every brush stroke was deliberate, every shadow carefully blended until the features staring back at her no longer resembled Nina Blackmore quite as much. It was not magic, nor was it a perfect disguise, but years of practice had taught her exactly how to deceive people who only saw what they expected to see. Satisfied, she picked up the suit her parents had brought. When the bathroom door opened again, it was as though Nina remained locked inside. The one who stepped into the hallway was Elias Blackmore. The young man emerged wearing the suit, though not in the immaculate manner his real brother would have. His tie sat slightly loose around his collar, the top button remained undone, and his jacket hung carelessly from his shoulders. His posture was slouched, one hand tucked lazily into his pocket, while an easy, cheeky grin rested across his face as though nothing in the world could possibly trouble him. The transformation was immediate. Even the atmosphere around him had changed. The moment Mr. Blackmore laid eyes on him, his brows furrowed deeply. "What kind of appearance is that?" he demanded, already sounding on the verge of losing his temper. Elias merely shrugged. Before his father could continue, the young man quickly crossed the room toward Mrs. Blackmore and lightly wrapped his fingers around her arm. "Mom," he said with an easy smile. "I didn't even do anything yet." The playful complaint only made Mr. Blackmore's expression darken further. He took a step forward, clearly prepared to scold him, but the instant Mrs. Blackmore lifted her eyes toward her husband, he stopped. Neither of them spoke. Her expression alone was enough. Mr. Blackmore clicked his tongue quietly before swallowing the rest of his anger, forcing himself into silence. Mrs. Blackmore turned back toward the young man, her expression becoming unexpectedly complicated. "Nina." She hesitated. Several emotions flickered across her face in quick succession. Concern. Relief. Hesitation. Regret. She looked as though she wanted to ask something. Or perhaps apologize. Her lips parted. No words came. Before she could gather the courage to continue, Elias gently removed her hand from his sleeve. "How much longer are you two going to keep doing this?" he asked quietly. Neither parent answered. His smile had already disappeared. His eyes drifted from his mother to his father before lowering toward the floor. "I honestly don't understand anymore." He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve absent-mindedly. "But I've got something I need to take care of." His gaze remained lowered. "So don't call me." After a brief pause, he added quietly. "I won't be coming back." Without waiting for either of them to respond, the young man turned around and walked out of the house. His footsteps were steady. Unhurried. He never looked back. Only after several streets separated him from the Blackmore residence did his pace finally slow. He stopped beside the wall of a quiet building and rested one hand against the bricks as his breathing gradually became uneven again. The moment her breathing finally settled into a steady rhythm, the vibration of a phone echoed through the quiet street. Nina instinctively straightened. Almost as quickly as she had abandoned herself moments earlier, the expression on her face shifted once more. The exhaustion disappeared behind an easy grin, her shoulders relaxed into the familiar slouch, and Elias Blackmore quietly resurfaced. Only after making sure no one nearby would immediately question the face they saw did she pull the phone from her pocket. The caller ID read Emma. She barely had enough time to answer before Emma's voice exploded through the speaker. "Nina. Where are you going? Why aren't you at home? What's going on? Are you in trouble? Why are you outside?" The barrage of questions came so quickly that Nina instinctively held the phone a few inches away from her ear. After waiting for Emma to finally pause long enough to breathe, she calmly placed it back against the side of her head. "My parents came." "What?" "They wanted me to impersonate Elias again." Silence hung between them for several seconds before Emma finally spoke again. "Okay," she said, sounding considerably calmer. "That's one thing." Another pause followed. "But why are you wearing the necklace again?" Nina frowned. "The necklace?" "The tracking necklace." Confused, Nina instinctively lowered her gaze. As she did, the phone nearly slipped from her hand. She caught it just in time before reaching toward her neck, her fingertips brushing against the cool metal resting there. The necklace was no longer hidden beneath her shirt. Somewhere along the way it had slipped free and now rested plainly over the outside of the suit. "Ah." She rubbed the back of her neck awkwardly. "I forgot." "You forgot?" Emma repeated in utter disbelief. "I accidentally left it outside my clothes." Emma let out the sort of sigh that sounded physically painful. "Nina." "Yes. Who are you pretending to be? Elias?" "And your brilliant plan was to impersonate your brother while wearing the necklace everyone associates with you." Nina froze. "I didn't think about that." "I know you didn't." Emma groaned. "I literally watched your location start moving and almost had a heart attack because I thought somebody kidnapped you." "I was planning to use the disguise as cover," Nina explained quietly. "I forgot the necklace was visible." "It'd be just like old times all over again," Emma muttered. Except somehow you've managed to make it even more stressful. Nina lowered her eyes. Sorry. No, Emma immediately replied. You're not getting away with one apology. Her tone shifted into one Nina knew all too well. The lecture tone. If you're not back home within the next hour or two, I'm coming over there myself. While Emma continued explaining every terrible consequence Nina would supposedly suffer for worrying everyone, Nina quietly raised a hand toward the street. A taxi slowed before stopping beside the curb. She opened the rear door and climbed inside before giving the driver the address her father had sent earlier. The taxi slowly pulled away from the sidewalk. Emma, meanwhile, had not finished. And another thing. Why do you still have that necklace on you in the first place? Nina looked down at it again. Because you gave it to me. I gave it to you because I wanted you to wear it. I am wearing it. You know what I mean. Emma let out another dramatic sigh before continuing. Didn't you ever wonder why I always seemed to know where you were? I assumed you were checking. I was checking. There was another short pause before Emma continued in a much calmer voice. The necklace sends notifications whenever you leave somewhere we've already marked as safe. Nina listened quietly. It doesn't constantly track every second of your life, Emma explained. That would be ridiculous. It only sends alerts whenever your location changes significantly. If you stay somewhere long enough, and enough notifications confirm that you safely returned from that place over and over again, the system eventually classifies it as one of your safe locations. It takes around 30 confirmed trips before it trusts the place. Once that happens, it stops bothering us every single time you go there. Nina blinked. I didn't know that. I know. Emma sounded almost offended. We figured you would have discovered it eventually. You never did. So all this time, you've been getting notifications. Every single time. Nina became unusually quiet. I'm sorry. Emma sighed. Forget it. Her tone softened. The next scheduled location check shouldn't happen for another couple of hours. So by then. I hope you're already heading home. Nina looked out the taxi window. Maybe. Nina. Yes. Don't make me come looking for you. I'll try. You'd better. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Emma spoke again. Take care of yourself. I will. After another brief exchange, the call finally ended. The taxi continued moving through the afternoon traffic. Up front, the driver stole another glance through the rearview mirror. From the beginning of the trip until now, the passenger had confused him more than any customer he had picked up in recent memory. When he first entered the vehicle, the young man looked completely carefree. Then, halfway through the phone call, subtle changes began appearing. His posture shifted. His expression softened. Even the cadence of his voice no longer matched the person who had first climbed into the taxi. The driver frowned thoughtfully. Excuse me, he finally said. Nina replied. I don't mean to be rude. He hesitated, trying to find the right words. But were you talking to your girlfriend? Nina stared blankly at him. No. The traffic light turned green. A chorus of impatient horns erupted from the cars behind them. The driver quickly apologized under his breath before pressing the accelerator. Right. He decided not to ask another question. Some things, he concluded, were better left unexplained. When they finally arrived at the destination, Nina quietly paid the fare before stepping out of the vehicle. The driver watched the suited figure disappear into the distance through his side mirror. Even after driving away, he could not shake the strange feeling that the person who had entered his taxi and the person who had left it somehow weren't quite the same. Roll Without a Self, Chapter 9. Jeannie loves novels. The moment the young man stepped out onto the street, he immediately turned his head toward the unfamiliar voice that had called out to him. So, you finally decided to show up. Standing a short distance away were two broad-shouldered men dressed in dark clothing, both watching him with expressions that suggested they had already been waiting for quite some time. The young man frowned before slowly turning his body toward them, allowing an arrogant smile to spread across his face as though their presence was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. And who exactly are you two? He asked, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to looking down on others. Do you usually scream at this young master from across the street whenever you want something? The two men exchanged confused glances. One of them quietly leaned toward the other. Is this really him? The boss said it was. He doesn't seem. The other shrugged. Doesn't matter. The first man cleared his throat before stepping forward. The boss has been waiting for you. Hearing those words, Nina immediately realized these were the people she had apparently been instructed to meet. So these are the people. She had absolutely no idea who they were. Nor did she know what Elias had gotten himself involved in. Still, exposing herself now would only make things worse. So she continued playing the role. The man looked at her before speaking again. You sure took your time. We even saw you walking around with that old man earlier. Nina paused for the briefest moment. Old man? She had no idea who they were referring to, but since they clearly believed she knew, she simply chose not to correct them. Instead, she gave an impatient wave of her hand. Enough talking. Are we leaving or not? The man blinked. This way. Nina looked toward the brightly lit entrance of the nearby building. Isn't the meeting supposed to be inside? No. The man's expression remained perfectly serious. You made the boss wait too long. He pointed toward a narrow alleyway instead. So this is your punishment. Before Nina could even process what he meant, the second man reached over and smacked him across the back of the head. "What the hell are you saying that for?" he hissed. The first man rubbed the back of his head. "What? It's true." The young man looked between the two of them before letting out a small scoff. "You ignored proper courtesy before I even arrived, and now you're arguing in front of me." He clicked his tongue. "You're lucky I'm in a good mood." Neither man dared answer. Instead, they hurriedly gestured for him to follow. "This way, young master." The further they walked, the quieter the surroundings became. The bustling sounds of the city slowly faded behind them until only distant traffic remained, replaced by cracked pavement, rusted fences, and abandoned-looking buildings that seemed forgotten by time itself. Eventually, they stopped in front of what looked less like a meeting place and more like a neglected warehouse that had somehow survived years of decay. People actually use this place? Nina doubted anyone passing by would ever believe there were people inside. The walls were stained with age, several windows had been boarded shut, and the entrance looked as though it would collapse if someone pushed on it too hard. Yet, despite its appearance, the moment the doors opened, she immediately noticed signs that people were actively living and working there. Furniture. Lights. Voices. Fresh cigarette smoke. This place was very much occupied. As she entered, a heavily built man sitting behind a worn wooden table immediately looked toward her. "The young master is here." The words had barely left one of the escort's mouths before Nina looked directly at the seated man. "You're the boss." The room instantly fell silent. The large man nearly choked on the alcohol he had been drinking. Cough, cough. He hurriedly waved both hands. "Don't say something like that." "I didn't say anything." "I mean, don't call me the boss." His face visibly paled. "If someone hears you calling me that, I'm dead." Nina quietly stared at him. What? None of this was making any sense. Still, she maintained her expression. Without waiting for permission, she casually pulled out a nearby chair, turned it around, and sat down backwards before resting her arms across the backrest, crossing one leg lazily over the other. "So." She looked directly at the nervous man. "What exactly is this about?" The man's expression gradually became serious again. "Our agreement ends today." He folded his hands together. "So." He looked directly into her eyes. "Where's the money?" Nina blinked. "Money. The 700 million. Silence. "You didn't forget, did you?" The room became noticeably colder. The agreement was simple. The man slowly leaned forward. "You promised that 700 million would be ready today." His voice became heavier. "Otherwise." He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. Nina's thoughts completely froze. 700 million. What? What kind of number is that? Her mind raced. Did Elias borrow 700 million? Did my brother just throw me into a situation where people are demanding $700 million? What kind of life has he been living? She desperately kept her expression calm despite the growing panic. One wrong answer could expose her immediately. "So." The man spoke once more. "You brought it?" Nina slowly opened her mouth before closing it again. She genuinely had no idea what these people were talking about. Every sentence they spoke only created more questions than answers. Eventually, she could no longer maintain the act. "I think there's been some kind of misunder." A deafening gunshot echoed through the building. Bang. For a split second, Nina felt nothing. Then an overwhelming force slammed into her back. Her body lurched forward as the chair beneath her tipped over completely, crashing onto the floor. The world spun violently around her. By the time she hit the ground, the only thing cushioning her fall was the surprisingly soft carpet spread across the floor. She lay there in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The air had been driven from her lungs, her ears rang from the gunshot, and somewhere behind her, warmth slowly began spreading across her back. Only then did the pain arrive. She lay motionless on the floor, her eyes fixed upon the worn, water-stained ceiling above her. For some reason, she wanted to laugh. Not because anything about this situation was amusing, but because it all felt so absurd. "So, this is how I die." She had imagined her death countless times throughout the years. Sometimes she pictured herself collapsing from exhaustion after pushing herself too far for her family. Sometimes she imagined dying quietly in some hospital after finally allowing herself to become sick. Other times she wondered whether she would simply disappear one day, leaving behind nothing except the roles she had spent her entire life playing. Never had she imagined that the end of her life would come from a single bullet fired by complete strangers over a debt she knew absolutely nothing about. Around her, the voices gradually became more distant. "It's time to go. Let the others come, deal with the rest. We're done here." Footsteps echoed somewhere nearby before slowly fading away. Nina no longer had the strength to turn her head. Her body felt strangely warm. The pain was still there, but it no longer seemed as important as it had been only moments ago. Instead, her thoughts wandered elsewhere. I guess this really was the last job. She had done it one final time. One last impersonation. One last borrowed identity. One last request for the sake of her family. Everything had ended exactly the way it always had. She had erased herself for someone else. Only this time, there would not be another role waiting afterward. A weak smile almost appeared across her lips before disappearing just as quickly. How ironic. After spending so many years pretending to be everyone else, the body that would eventually be discovered would not even belong to Nina. It would be found wearing Elias's face. Elias's clothes. Elias's scent. Perhaps people would even mistake the corpse for him at first glance. Even in death. She had disappeared beneath someone else's identity. The darkness around the edges of her vision slowly crept inward, swallowing more and more of the room until only a narrow circle remained. Then, as another thought surfaced, her sluggish mind suddenly stirred. Wait. The necklace. Emma's necklace. The tracking device. Even if she died here, Emma would find her. She would know where she had fallen. At the very least, she would not remain abandoned in some forgotten building where no one would ever learn her name. Emma would come. She would make sure Nina received a proper burial. The thought brought her an unexpected sense of peace. She no longer had to wonder what came next. She no longer had to struggle with what her parents expected of her. She no longer had to worry about how she would continue living while constantly becoming someone else. Perhaps this really was the kindest ending she could have hoped for. Emma would grieve. Of that, Nina had no doubt. But Emma would also continue living. She had people who loved her. A family that cared for her. She would not be alone. Knowing that eased the last lingering weight pressing against Nina's heart. A faint smile finally settled upon her lips. Goodbye. Whether she was speaking to Emma, to her family, or to the life she had never truly lived, even she no longer knew. Her eyelids slowly drifted shut. The last traces of light disappeared. Then, with one final breath, Nina surrendered herself to the warm, endless darkness that quietly embraced her.